The men of the German U-boat arm prided themselves on understanding danger. They trained for it, lived with it, measured their worth by how calmly they faced it. Depth charges were danger. Destroyers were danger. Aircraft were danger. Balloons were not. Along the British coastline in 1940, hundreds of barrage balloons hovered above ports, estuaries, and industrial cities. From a distance, they looked absurd. Bulbous shapes drifting lazily in the sky, swaying with the wind like toys that had broken free of a child's hand. German pilots cursed them. Submariners barely noticed them at all. In the Kriegsmarine, barrage balloons were dismissed as an airman's problem. Their purpose was obvious and limited: force low-flying bombers to climb higher, ruin their aim, make attacks less accurate. For a weapon of the deep, operating unseen beneath the surface, they seemed irrelevant. The sea, after all, belonged to steel hulls and torpedoes, not fabric and gas. But the balloons were never meant to fight alone. Each one was anchored to the earth by a steel cable, thin, strong, and brutally unforgiving. Some stretched hundreds of meters downward, disappearing into seawater that was rarely calm and never predictable. Tides pulled them at angles, currents dragged them sideways, storms bent them into unseen arcs that turned open water into a hidden lattice of metal. British engineers understood this. German commanders did not. During the early months of the Battle of Britain, U-boats began creeping closer to the coast. It was a calculated risk. Convoys hugged the shoreline. Harbors were busy. Targets were plentiful. If a submarine stayed shallow and alert, it could strike quickly and escape before escorts arrived. What the German command failed to appreciate was how little margin for error shallow water allowed. There was no deep dive to safety, no slow descent into darkness. Everything happened fast, and mistakes were final. From a U-boat's conning tower, a barrage balloon looked harmless. Its cable was nearly invisible against churning gray water, its position impossible to judge precisely. Charts did not mark them as hazards. Intelligence reports mentioned them only in passing. To the men below deck, listening to engines thrum and seawater whisper past the hull, balloons did not exist at all. Until one moment, brief, violent, irreversible, proved that they should have been afraid. The sea does not care what you believe. Steel does not forgive arrogance. The order to operate near the British coast was never given lightly. Every German submariner understood what shallow water meant. It meant limited maneuvering room, slower dives, and nowhere to hide if things went wrong. Yet, in 1940, temptation outweighed caution. Merchant ships hugged the coastline for protection. Harbors were crowded. Escorts were stretched thin. A daring commander could strike and vanish before the enemy even understood what had happened. That logic drew one U-boat closer than doctrine preferred, into waters that charts described as navigable, but never forgiving. The sea there was restless and gray, constantly reshaped by tide and wind. Fishing boats worked the shallows by day. At night, coastal lights flickered faintly behind blackout curtains. Somewhere above it all, unseen from the conning tower, barrage balloons drifted, silent sentinels tethered to the shore. The U-boat ran at periscope depth, then surfaced briefly to recharge batteries. The captain was confident. British patrols were light. The weather provided cover. No aircraft were visible. Nothing suggested danger. Below deck, engines throbbed steadily. Men moved through the narrow steel corridors with practiced efficiency. There was tension, yes, but also routine. This was familiar work. What no one aboard could see was how the current had pulled one balloon's steel cable far from its anchor point, dragging it into open water at a shallow angle. It no longer descended vertically. It drifted like a blade laid flat beneath the surface. The submarine crossed its path without warning. There was no explosion, no impact loud enough to announce itself immediately. Just a sudden shudder that ran through the hull, followed by a sound every submariner feared, metal screaming against metal. The propellers slowed violently. Gauges flickered. The engine room reported abnormal resistance almost at once. Attempts to correct course failed. The boat responded sluggishly, as if caught in thick mud. The captain ordered engines stopped. Too late. The cable tightened as the submarine drifted forward, wrapping itself around the propeller shaft with mechanical inevitability. What had been an invisible threat seconds earlier now held the boat fast. Only then did understanding begin to dawn. This was not a mine, not a net, not an accident of machinery. This was something the Germans had never planned for. An aerial defense reaching down into the sea, striking where no one believed it could. In shallow water, a crippled submarine was not merely damaged, it was exposed. And exposure near the enemy's shore was often a death sentence waiting for confirmation. The first rule of submarine warfare was mobility. As long as a U-boat could move, it could survive. Speed meant escape. Depth meant safety. Silence meant invisibility. Stripped of movement, all three vanished at once. In the engine room, sailors crowded around trembling machinery, hands braced against vibrating steel. The propeller shaft refused to turn freely. Each cautious attempt to engage the engines produced the same result. Resistance, grinding, the unmistakable scream of metal under strain. The cable was not merely snagged, it had cinched tight, twisted by the submarine's own momentum into a knot no wrench could undo. The captain ordered damage reports. They arrived quickly, and none were good. The boat could not reach full power. Steering was unreliable. Diving deeper risked driving the cable tighter still, or tearing the propeller assembly apart. In deep water there might have been time to improvise. Here, there was only anxiety and the slow realization that the sea itself had turned hostile. Above them, the surface was close, too close. The U-boat drifted, caught between buoyancy and gravity, its engines reduced to hesitant pulses. Men spoke in lowered voices now. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the hull, the hiss of valves, the faint rush of water sliding past steel. These noises were not just unsettling, they were dangerous. Sound traveled, and British hydrophones listened. The captain faced a terrible choice. To surface was to invite detection by patrol craft and aircraft. To remain submerged was to risk being found anyway, motionless and helpless, unable to flee or dive deep enough to evade attack. The crew understood what this meant. A submarine was designed to be elusive, not resilient. It could not absorb punishment like a battleship. Once found, survival depended on movement, and movement was exactly what they no longer had. Then came the sound they dreaded most. A distant, rhythmic thump echoed through the water. Not machinery, not waves, propellers. British ships were nearby. The cable itself had not fired a shot. It had not breached the hull. But by stealing the submarine's freedom, it had done something far worse. It had announced the U-boat's presence, fixing it in place like a pinned insect. In the quiet that followed, every man aboard knew the truth. The balloon's steel tether, dismissed, ignored, underestimated, had accomplished what escorts and aircraft often struggled to achieve. It had trapped a predator in the open. And now the hunters were closing in. The first British patrol vessel did not arrive with drama or noise. It came cautiously, guided by hydrophone operators who listened to the water the way hunters listen to wind through trees. They heard something wrong, an engine note that faltered, a rhythm that lacked purpose, a submarine that was moving without intent. That alone was enough. As the patrol closed in, the U-boat's crew felt the shift in the sea before they heard the enemy. Pressure waves rolled along the hull. Sonar pings followed, sharp, deliberate pulses that confirmed the worst fear aboard the boat. They had been found. The captain ordered silence. Engines were stopped entirely. Lights dimmed. Men froze in place, breath held, hoping the stillness might erase them. But the cable held fast, keeping the submarine trapped in a narrow envelope of water. It could neither flee nor sink into the depths where sound dissolved into nothing. The British did not rush. They circled. From above, the situation was clear. The submarine was not behaving like one preparing to escape. It wallowed. It drifted. It lingered in water no competent commander would choose unless forced. The conclusion was obvious. Something had gone terribly wrong below the surface. The order came quietly. Depth charges rolled from the stern of the patrol ship and slipped into the sea. There was a pause, long enough for the crew of the U-boat to count heartbeats. Then the ocean detonated. The first explosion was not fatal. It was meant to measure. Instruments shattered. Light bulbs burst. Men were thrown against bulkheads as the shockwave tore through the hull. The submarine groaned, steel protesting under sudden stress. The second attack followed closer. Water forced its way through weakened seals. Pipes ruptured. The cable around the propeller shaft tightened further, locking the boat in a cruel embrace as if the sea itself were holding it down. Inside the U-boat there was no panic, only urgency. Damage control teams worked blindly in dim light. Orders were shouted, repeated, obeyed. But discipline could not change physics. A submarine that could not move could not survive sustained attack. The final charges struck with precision. The balloon had done its work long before this moment. It had taken no lives directly. It had not torn metal or breached compartments. Yet by immobilizing the U-boat in shallow, hostile water, it had delivered the crew to their fate as surely as any torpedo. When the sea finally closed over the wreckage, there was no marker above it, no sign that the battle had even taken place. Only the quiet certainty that a weapon never intended for submarines had helped destroy one, without firing a single shot. The loss did not make headlines in Germany. U-boats vanished with unsettling regularity in 1940, and this one was recorded like many others, missing, presumed destroyed by enemy action. There was no category for what had truly happened, no checkbox for a balloon, no doctrine for embarrassment. But inside the Kriegsmarine, questions lingered. Reports filtered back through interrogations, intercepted communications, and British after-action summaries recovered later in the war. Somewhere in the analysis, an uncomfortable truth emerged. The submarine had not been defeated by superior tactics or overwhelming force. It had been undone by an assumption that certain threats could be safely ignored. Quietly, warnings were issued. Coastal waters near balloon-protected harbors were to be avoided. Surfacing near defended ports became even more restricted. But war had momentum, and momentum does not turn easily. U-boats still hunted close to shore. Balloons still drifted. Steel cables still vanished beneath moving water. The British, for their part, never claimed the balloons as miracle weapons. Officially, they remained what they had always been: air defenses. Their unintended effect on submarines was treated as a fortunate anomaly, a reminder that layered defenses worked best when the enemy underestimated them. And that, perhaps, was the real victory. World War II was filled with revolutionary machines and deliberate inventions: radar, code-breaking, jet engines. Yet some of its most decisive moments came not from brilliance but from blind spots, from failing to imagine how ordinary tools might behave in extraordinary circumstances. A barrage balloon was slow, vulnerable, easy to mock, but tethered to the earth by steel, shaped by wind and tide, it became something else entirely. An invisible extension of the battlefield, reaching into a realm it was never meant to touch. Somewhere on the seabed near the British coast, twisted metal once testified to that fact. A submarine that believed itself safe beneath the surface had learned otherwise. Not because its enemy was stronger, but because it was careless. In war, as in the sea, danger is not always where you are trained to look. And sometimes the weapon that kills you is the one you never thought worth fearing.